Hello, and welcome to Christ-Centered Reflections. I'm Reverend Wayman Rucker, and with me today is Reverend Stephen Lawrence and Reverend Jay Gardner. For this special edition of Christ-Centered Reflections, the Seekers of Wisdom Bible Study class is joining us. We hope that these reflections on the Lord and His Word will be helpful as you strive to follow the teachings of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Now, with regard to the Seekers of Wisdom class, we take a topical approach to Bible study. We have been studying women in the Bible. So today we want to look at another woman of the Old Testament. She's probably not well known to most of us. Her successor, I believe, is better known to us, the woman who's named for the book of Esther. And I'm sure that we've heard of Queen Esther. But before Queen Esther became queen, there was another woman who was the queen, Sister Vashti. Okay, so we want to look at Sister Vashti today. And so we want to start with chapter 1 of Esther. And in the first chapter, when it states in verse 1, this is what happened during the time of Xerxes, the Xerxes who ruled over 127 provinces, stretching from India to Kush. This king was the king of the Persian Empire. We recall that at one time the Babylonian Empire was number one throughout the world. But they were conquered by the Persians. And so the Persians are the dominant power at this particular time. And it states in verse 3 that in the third year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials. The military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes, and the nobles of the provinces were present. And in verse 4, we're told that for a full 180 days, he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. Oh, it was something to behold. He spared no cost in displaying the wealth of his kingdom. And so they're all gathered for this banquet, and we're told that it wasn't a one-day banquet. It wasn't even a weekend banquet. It lasted 180 days. That's half a year, almost half a year, right, Reverend Gardner?
My.
And in verse 5, we're told that when the days were over, the king gave another banquet. And this banquet lasted 7 days, okay? But see, this banquet was different because it included the least to the greatest people in his kingdom. And in verse 7, we're told that wine was served in goblets of gold, each one of them different from the other, and the royal wine was abundant in keeping with the king's liberality. So wine was emphasized. Drinking was emphasized at this particular 7-day banquet. And we're told in verse 8 that by the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink in his own way. For the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man what he wished. They're allowed to drink when they wanted to drink, and they were allowed to consume as much wine as they wanted. In verse 9, we're told that Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. So after 7 days of drinking and partying, it says that the king, he was in high spirits. What's high spirits? Oh, he was tipsy? And so he commanded that his wife be brought before the men that were gathered at his banquet, because he says that she was lovely to look at. She was pleasing to the eyes, Reverend Lawrence. So actually he wanted to show her off. And he gave instructions that she come wearing her royal crown. In verse 12, it says, when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Now, the Bible doesn't say why she refused to show up. And so, do you have any ideas why she may have refused to show up? Anyone?
Her husband wasn't acting as a protector, but I guess saw her leadership as being more than enough for her protection, but she didn't feel that way.
Okay. Anyone else care to?
I understand that at that time, a wife was not allowed to disobey her husband. But I suppose that Queen Vashti had sense enough to realize if those folks been in there drinking all that time, I had better not go. And I think she was smart.
Yes.
Okay.
I think she was having her own banquet, and she didn't want to leave her guests, and she thought her banquet was as important as his banquet.
All right. When I did my research on this, I came across one commentator who stated that when the king commanded that she wear the royal crown, he was instructing that she wear only the royal crown.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
So if she wore only the royal crown, what does that mean? She's nude. Okay, and so that could be one reason why she refused to show up, because she didn't want to display her nudeness to all those other men. Now, in verse number 13, it says that since it was customary for the king to consult experts in matters of law and justice, he spoke with the wise men and who understood the times. So the king, he didn't know what to do. How am I going to deal with my wife who disobeys me? In front of all these people. So he consulted with them to see what he should do. Verse number 16. Then Mumukin, one of the 7 advisors, replied in the presence of the king and the nobles. He said, Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only against the king, but also against the nobles and the peoples of all the provinces of King Xerxes. She's done wrong. But king, she's not only dissed you, she's dissed all of the nobles and the people in your entire kingdom. He says also in verse 17, for the queen's conduct will become known to all the women. All the women in the kingdom won't hear about this king. And so they will despise their husbands. Reactions to that.
Why didn't he go naked with his crown to the women?
Well, he's the king. He's the king.
It's always different, right?
And he gives the command. And remember, in what we've discovered in our study about women in the Bible in biblical times, they didn't have a lot of power. It was the male who dominated. And he gave the orders, he gave the instructions, and if you didn't follow, the woman didn't follow, then there are consequences to be paid. Deacon Lane.
I think that when Memucan told the king what he told him, I think it would reflect on all the women throughout the region. It would empower them to refuse to do the biddings of their husbands.
And that's what he's saying.
She's demonstrating her power and how it can empower other women. I'm thinking of Shiphrah and Puah, and how they were 2 midwives back in the Exodus story. And the king gave the edict, said kill all the newborns, and they refused to do it. And so we see these women who are standing against these people of power and who are demonstrating their own power and empowering others.
Okay. And so they have to put an end to this according to Memucan. You got to put an end to that. So in verse number 18, he says, this very day the Persian and Median women of the nobility who have heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's nobles in the same way. There will be no end of disrespect and discord. So it says in verse number 19, therefore, this is Memucan speaking, if it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree, and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of King Xerxes. Also, let the king give her royal position to someone else who is better than she. Verse 20, it says that when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout a vast realm, all the women will respect their husbands, from the least to the greatest. All women throughout the whole kingdom, they're going to respect their husband. Nobody else is going to disobey their husband. Yes.
That seems very unrealistic, and it makes me wonder about what's in Memucan's mind, where he's gathering all of this information. He takes one incident and then he blows it up and says, this is the end of the world. Your wife didn't do what you asked her to do. Civilization as we know it is over. We have to act fast and act hard. It's so reminiscent of how when people are in power and they know their power is based on a shaky situation, that they think the worst will happen. It could be that people would read about this and maybe 1 or 2 women might try it and nothing would happen. But he has now taken one incident and ballooned it into a national issue. And does he think the women are going to obey this command? The men will feel good about it, but if another drunken situation comes up, it's amazing how we can deceive ourselves when we think we're in control and have power. We think we can make people do what we want them to do, so we pass a law. Oh, that'll fix it. Rebellion finds a way to stir up. Yeah.
One of the advantages of having the study of women, we've been able to get a woman's point of view, a woman's reaction to what we've been studying. When you read this particular passage about the advice that Memucan gave to the king, what are the females in this class thinking? What's your reaction to that?
I would think because of his drunken state, he wasn't even responsible for what he said. Because if he had been drunk or partying for all that time, he could not have been thinking logically. So, Memucan took this, and he, as Reverend Lawrence says, he figured, well, I'll demand this, and because he has the power, he should do it. But I would think that he wasn't responsible after that 7 days.
I hear that, but he has to be in a mental state, a healthy state. So you cannot excuse the most powerful person of the state that they're in.
I think he could have handled it differently, but I also think he's the king, and he looks like a fool. She's, especially in a society that says women are not the authority. He looks like she's the one in control, and he's just got the crown. Once it was made clear that she wasn't coming, then he's the king, he's the man, and he's supposed to correct the problem.
So let's try to go back there. Do you think it was customary for the queen of any nation to be paraded in front of commoners?
It must not have been, because she was
So if this was when we look at this, not only, there are several layers of the inappropriateness of his request. And so there are a lot of dynamics and a lot of layers here of what's customary, what's appropriate, what's inappropriate, and what rights the queen did have, that were sort of undone by this council.
Reverend Gardner, let me jump in on what might be another one of these levels of layer. It's not that long ago that in some segments of society, in places in the world, people eat together, and then there comes a point in the meal when women go into one room and men go into another room, and cigars come out and brandy sifters come out, and the men talk, about sports, and the women talk about whatever. And in those settings, it's not unusual that men begin to get, what's the word? Rowdy. And boasting starts to happen. And all of that kind of competitiveness that leads to making these foolish requests. And at the level of relationship, I'm wondering if Ahasuerus and Vashti, when the evening's getting ready to start and she's, getting dressed and says, "Oh, you're looking beautiful tonight, my queen," or whatever, and then he doesn't say, "At some point tonight, I might ask you to come into the room with the boys, so don't get upset about it." I'm sure they didn't have that conversation. Right. And if she had said no and he had said, "Well, I'll go talk to her," and they were behind closed doors, you know what that conversation looks like. She is telling him, "Don't you ever," and the head is going, and the head, don't you ever. You know that's going on. That's because that's the level of human relationship between people. But on the larger scale, in public, we seem moved to take on these other personas and behave out of character, but to prove something or to boast about something or to make a point. And here's Vashti, like gritting her teeth, saying, when I get him home tonight, I'm gonna. And then she never gets home that night because they changed the locks and she can't. She's lost access. And we're looking for somebody that will now do better than her. What's better than her?
Now, when you look at chapter 2, the king remembers Vashti. And so once again, he's advised to find someone to replace her. And so what they do, they go out to all the provinces looking for a woman to replace him, Vashti. And they just go, they just bring them in. And then what they're doing, they go through a year of beauty treatments before they can even come into the presence of the king. And when they're called into the presence of the king, they come and spend the night with him. And then if he's pleased with that person, then that's the one he'll select as queen. And so eventually, Esther, a Jew, was brought, and she pleased him, and so he selected her to be his wife.
Without getting way too far from Vashti, Esther is able to use her own power in a way that fits into her time frame. As the story goes, she uses her cleverness to unveil this plot, and part of it is that she uses her feminine allure, that she invites Haman to the soiree and then just gets him in compromising positions so that when the king comes in, the king assumes something, and it helps her cause. We can't turn back the clock on poor Queen Vashti, but when you are in a situation where you are powerless because you are dominated by some other thing, patriarchy dominates, and women are in it, and they just have to figure out a way. Women figured out ways to use what they had to accomplish what they needed to accomplish. The Shiphrah and Puah example that you gave earlier is a great example. Here's two midwives that are employed by the Pharaoh to do one thing, and they find a way around it. And when the Pharaoh asks them about it, they say, well, we just couldn't get there in time. Women are so vigorous in the way they give birth. And that's not probably all the way true, but they were clever enough to find a way around it. The cleverness becomes the power of the women in some of these stories because they don't have that overt power that the men have. They have to find a way. And it made me think, I won't go on long with this, it made me think about how today there's an industry in our country around beauty that's aimed at women. So, because that chapter 2, that's the Miss Persia contest. And they give everybody a makeover for a year. They give them lessons on how to be a princess, and then they spend the night with the king and see if they, are they voted off the island or do they stay? It's a competition, but it's about the power of your beauty. For men, it's to oogle over, and women find a way to make it work for them. So there's scholarships involved, or there's I'm going to use this as a platform for getting the next thing that I need to get, because we are still so beauty conscious, and we want to limit and reduce people to the way they look. Esther was beautiful, Vashti was beautiful, but they were smart too, and they figured out a way to work their way through a system that wasn't going to give them any traditional power. They had to find another kind of power.
I want to thank you once more for this opportunity to get together and study God's Word. On behalf of the ministerial staff, we thank you.